Our episode begins with Tao, frightened after seeing the lick emerge from the attempt to open the chest. Lloyd asks what kind of creature a lick is. Tao responds to Lloyd, saying it's nothing major, and asks him to wait outside. However, Lloyd wanted to see, so she throws him out, giving him a scare. She apologizes, but had to do it. She even considers that she might have broken some bones, but it's better than dying. Then the lick begins to attack her. For Tao, having a lick in a low-level dungeon was no joke. Even ranka adventurers could hardly fight one. Tao wants to buy time for Lloyd to escape. Lloyd wonders why she threw him out of the dungeon. He wanted to learn more about Kai and the dungeon itself. He enlarges his shield, and some small orcs in his way suffer a great impact thanks to Lloyd's shield. Lloyd doesn't understand why she did that and wonders if he can go back. He asks Grim what he thinks about it, but they're out of signal. Suddenly, the signal returns, and Grim tells Lloyd to return immediately. Tao is fighting the lick, thinking she can't win against that creature. She panics, thinking she's going to die, but since she thinks Lloyd fled, she could retreat slowly. The lick notices she has Kai techniques, considering it as a foreign art, and recalls eating someone who used Kai. For the lick, it's just an inferior form of magic. The lick always ventures with adventurous souls around there, gaining a lot of knowledge and technique. He says it's not worth eating Tao, but that man who was there before, who reacted to his attack, is worth eating. Tao says the lick and Lloyd are nothing alike. Both sought knowledge, but Tao felt that Lloyd found something interesting, even in a pebble, which made her happy. Because people on the continent regard Kai technique as inferior, but Lloyd found it incredible. The lick doesn't care about what Tao says. Tao begins her breathing again and leaps toward the lick, who says her attack is useless, but Tao doesn't care. Since she was 5 years old, she trained every single day to use her Kai, rain or shine, like an idiot doing nothing cool in search of a boyfriend, and then she breaks the lick's shield. She uses a very strong technique and tells the lick not to mess with her. She used a Kai attack with all her power at point-blank range and became breathless because she used too much Kai. Tao can't even move a finger. The lick finds the whole situation deplorable. Even her Kai technique that broke his barrier is weaker than the magic he does with a single finger. For the lick, Tao wasted her life. Then, the lick disperses a magical ability toward Tao. However, his magic is broken, thanks to Lloyd, who arrived in time to protect Tao with his shield. Lloyd said he would fight with him, but since he was in a hurry, he would need to defeat him quickly. Lloyd was eager to play with the lick. Tao is shocked because he made a barrier. She asks what Lloyd is doing there. The lick decides to attack again, and Lloyd goes to him. He moves so fast that the lick doesn't see Lloyd behind him. Lloyd uses his breath. The lick can't believe that Lloyd used an airtight magic, shot off, without an enchantment. Tao is surprised to see that breath. The lick decides to attack Lloyd and doesn't understand what kind of barrier it is because it's very resistant. Lloyd thinks he can combine Kai and mana, and remembers Tao telling him to focus. And he starts focusing. He needed to take a deep breath. He begins his breathing. He needed to bring air to his lungs and accelerate the magic. He inhales more air. The lick realizes that he really would escape and decides to attack him again, but his magical barrier is too resistant and he can't do anything. Lloyd then uses the power of his breath. The barrier was in the way. The lick sees the barrier break and he can see Lloyd, then initiates another attack. Tao thought Lloyd would be attacked, but Lloyd uses his breath and quickly gets out of there. Lloyd had only undone his attack so he could inhale more air, channel more Kai. Lloyd takes the Kai and mana and molds them together. The lick doesn't give up and tries to hit Lloyd in every possible way, but he doesn't give up. Lloyd gives a wicked grin and disperses all of the lick's attacks, saying he couldn't reach him, calling the lick weak. The lick needed to be more refined and go further. Lloyd then launches an attack toward the lick, who tries to defend himself, but Lloyd doesn't give up and continues attacking. Lloyd finds it amusing and starts laughing at the situation, telling the lick to endure it because he had more ideas to test. He wanted to play more. Lloyd continues dispersing various abilities, and the lick himself becomes incredulous because he's attacking very fast and without an enchantment. It seemed like a Kai technique. The lick doesn't understand how could a Kai technique match his spells. At that moment, Lloyd manages to hit the lick, and the lick recognizes that he surpassed his spells with Kai. Lloyd wants even more refined and sharp attacks and launches more attacks with Kai technique toward the lick. The lick sees no way out other than using a magical barrier. But it's no use because Lloyd not only surpasses it, but also hits the lick with everything, defeating him with that single attack. Tao is dazzled thrilled seeing Lloyd, who is very happy to have succeeded. For Tao, it was a big waste of time because the chest had nothing interesting. It was just an old knife. But Lloyd believes that the weapon had been imbued with mana. He asks Tao if he can keep it, and Tao says it's no problem. Then, the chest closes and it starts sinking into the ground. Lloyd doesn't understand what happened. Tao says that's what happens when someone takes the treasure and the dungeon collapses. Lloyd thinks it's like a lizard that drops its tail. In this case, it gives up the treasure to flee. He understands that the treasure was the core of the dungeon. Lloyd thinks there's still something interesting behind the dungeon and keeps pulling the chest so it won't descend. While the dungeon collapses, Tao is agitated because she wants to get out of there immediately. After a moment, the two of them leave the dungeon and it closes completely. Lloyd finds it interesting because it continues gathering strength underground until it turns into a dungeon again. Tao says he's a wizard and a good one at that. She asks why, in the end, he fought using Kai techniques and not magic. She was starting to think it was because the lick was mocking her. Lloyd responds that he thought it would be fun. Tao, ever cynical, says she had imagined that. Then Lloyd realizes he needs to return to the castle and starts flying. Tao says the technique he used at the end was the secret Kai technique, the Kai blade. She's impressed because she can't even use it herself. She says she will train much more and one day she will become an interesting woman. Lloyd says it sounds great. Whether it's magic or Kai techniques, it's always good to invest in oneself. Lloyd says goodbye, saying they would grow together. Tao then continues her journey, swearing she would improve so she could become an interesting woman. But she realizes she didn't get his contact information. Lloyd returns home, asking if Grim was okay. Upon arriving, she sees Grim on the ground with bumps on his head. And then he starts crying, remembering Silpha and her training. Silpha asked why he wasn't giving his best, why he became so weak like that. She hit Grim on the head with a wooden sword, saying she would be tougher to retrain him from scratch. Grim tells Lloyd he didn't even have a chance. Even though he's a demon, he asked Lloyd to come back soon, crying a lot when he said that. Grim is angry because Lloyd took a long time to get a lousy knife. Lloyd says he had already apologized before, but it was a very worthy treasure. And then he puts the sword in hot water and starts scraping the surface. Grim watches without understanding much, until Lloyd achieves what he imagined. The knife was indeed treated with mana essence. It was a catalyst used for enchantment magic, where you write magical formulas to enhance them. In the case of that knife, it seems it had been enchanted with strengthening power. Grim asks if that meant he could research enchantment magic with the knife. Lloyd says it's not that simple. And then Lloyd begins to shake the formula he makes. Considering that Lloyd only had that small amount of mana essence taken from that knife, it meant that mana essence was difficult to obtain and the magic was complicated to perform. If it failed, both the essence and the weapons would be lost. So Lloyd would analyze the mana essence and create his own. Then Lloyd uses water magic maximum purification. That magic was normally used to purify dirty water, but if the level of purity was increased, it could separate even base elements. Grim is shocked by everything coming to life. With that magic, he managed to separate silver, oil, and hematite. Grim asks if that wasn't made with monster core powder, which was very rare. Lloyd says that since they had the dungeon core, maybe they could do it. So at that moment, they only needed oil and silver and a bunch of weapons. Lloyd goes to his father, who was giving him a bag of coins in his hands, asking if he didn't want gold coins, but Lloyd said he wanted silver ones. And then he leaves all happy with the bag of silver coins. His father thinks he's very modest and wonders how he'll use that allowance. The old man seemed very proud. Lloyd starts his experiment with the help of his familiar Grim. And then we see Silpha again in her process of training Lloyd. She says he's slow, but she was actually surprised. And suddenly, she disappears. He starts looking for her until she attacks him and picks him up. Lloyd says she won, and she just agrees. Then Silpha hands him a bottle, and he asks if she's sure because the deal was that he would get oil if he hit her once. She responds saying it's okay. She was happy. She was trying to understand why he had been so deplorable the other day, but it seems it was just a moment. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. Grim watches everything from the window very angrily. He thought Silpha was a monster. Silpha thinks Lloyd could be the leader of the knights when he grows up, or a master of the sword. Lloyd runs off, thanking her and saying he would show her when he finished. Silpha thinks he's going to make food, and then he continues his experiment with Grim by his side. Next, Lloyd asks Albert for a bunch of weapons, explaining that he wanted to test enchantment magic. magic, and he starts petting his brother, thinking he would ask for something cuter, and sees that he really likes magic. Then Albert gives Lloyd the weapons from his guards to enchant. One of the guards says he had just improved that weapon, and his coworker tells him to give up because enchantment magic is very difficult and always fails. Grim watches everything from afar. Now, they would indeed make a lot of enchantment magic and create the best weapons. Grim was quite motivated. They start the work. Grim sees that he had applied 3 layers of enhancement and elasticity improvement. He doesn't understand how he finds space. He fills every possible space with magic formulas until it goes very wrong and the weapon breaks. The steel couldn't handle the magic Lloyd put into it, and he found it really difficult. But Grim was rooting for them, saying they had only just begun. So they break another sword, and as a result, a bunch of swords break. But finally, they manage to enchant one sword without breaking it. And then Lloyd goes to show it to Albert. Out of 120 weapons, 50 were a success. The guards were shocked. Lloyd apologizes for wasting 70 swords. Filfer realizes it wasn't food, but in reality, he had managed 80. Then he tries to put more stuff in them, and they end up breaking. Albert looks at the sword very impressed. After all, a top-notch enchanter has a success rate of only 10%. What his little brother had done was truly unbelievable. Lloyd was more talented than Albert imagined. Silpha sees the guard scoffing at the boy and gets very angry, until the guard went to sheath the sword, and the sword cuts the scabbard in half. Grim sees all of that with a taste of victory. Lloyd asks Albert to use the swords in battle because he wanted to see, and then Albert decides to take him along.